The room was silent, but the tension screamed louder than any war siren. Screens flickered with satellite feeds, oil tankers frozen mid-route, and a single red line across the map, the Strait of Hormuz. I leaned forward and said the words no one wanted to hear. If America enforces this blockade, the peace deal is already dead. They laughed. Diplomats exchanged glances, analysts rolled their eyes. To them, it was pressure tactics, a calculated move, a show of dominance. But they didn't understand what happens when power meets pride in a place where 1/5 of the world's oil flows through a narrow strip of water. Iran didn't just reject the warning, they mocked it. Their officials called it stupid, a desperate attempt by Washington to force surrender. And on the surface, it made sense. The United States had warships, aircraft carriers, surveillance dominance. The blockade looked like control. But beneath the calm briefings and confident speeches, something was shifting. Iran wasn't preparing to break the blockade. It was preparing to rewrite the rules of it. And no one noticed the quiet coordination happening in the background with China. The strategy was subtle at first. Ships slowed, routes changed, signals flickered. Then came the first sign. Vessels began broadcasting Chinese ownership just to pass safely. It wasn't fear, it was adaptation. A new system was forming, one where power wasn't decided by fleets, but by alliances. And suddenly, my warning didn't sound so crazy anymore. Because the blockade wasn't stopping the flow, it was reshaping it. South China Morning Post. The world expected Iran to collapse under pressure. Instead, it tightened its grip. Fast attack boats, small, cheap, deadly, began swarming the waters like shadows. Tankers hesitated. Insurance rates exploded. Global markets trembled. The US had dominance on paper, but control in reality was slipping. Because controlling a narrow waterway isn't about power, it's about persistence. And Iran had both. New York Post, then came the moment everything changed. Iran didn't close the strait completely, it controlled it selectively. Some ships passed, others were turned away, and the pattern was clear: those aligned or appearing aligned with China moved with less resistance. The blockade had unintentionally created a new gatekeeper, and Iran was holding the key. Meanwhile, Washington insisted the strategy was working, claiming ships were turning back under pressure. But turning back wasn't victory, it was hesitation. And hesitation is where power begins to shift. Behind closed doors, the real objective became clearer. Analysts revealed the blockade wasn't just about Iran, it was about China. The goal was to force Beijing to pressure Tehran into a deal. But instead of breaking the alliance, it strengthened it. China didn't confront the blockade directly. It adapted around it, quietly securing routes, stabilizing supply chains, and turning geopolitical pressure into strategic leverage. And just like that, the plan started collapsing from within. Then, the breaking point came. Iran escalated. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical arteries of global trade, was suddenly under full military control. Ships were warned. Some were attacked. Others were frozen in place. The world watched as oil prices surged and panic spread. This wasn't just a regional conflict anymore. It was a global chokehold, and still, the blockade remained. The United States refused to back down, insisting the pressure would force a final agreement. But instead of peace, negotiations stalled. Iran refused to move forward without concessions. The blockade hadn't brought resolution. It had hardened positions. Exactly what I had warned. Exactly what they dismissed. The Guardian, but the final twist didn't come from Washington or Tehran. It came from Beijing. China didn't need to break the blockade. It simply proved it didn't matter. By navigating around it, leveraging neutrality, and maintaining energy flows through strategic alignment, China showed the world a new reality. Control isn't about stopping movement, it's about deciding who gets to move. And in that moment, everything changed. The blockade was still there. The war was still unresolved. But the balance of power had already shifted, and the warning they once laughed at, it became the truth no one could ignore. No treaty was signed, no announcement was made, yet behind closed doors, a silent alignment was forming. China didn't send warships into the chaos. It sent something far more powerful: stability. While the West focused on confrontation, Beijing focused on continuity. Oil contracts were rewritten overnight, payments shifted to alternative systems, and suddenly the flow of energy no longer depended on Western approval, it depended on quiet agreements no one could see. Iran understood the value immediately. Instead of resisting pressure blindly, it leaned into this emerging system. Tankers once flagged under neutral nations began shifting their identities. Routes that seemed blocked suddenly reopened, not through force, but through coordination. It wasn't defiance, it was evolution. And the more the blockade tightened, the more efficient this hidden network became. The West had expected isolation. What it got instead was adaptation. A system designed to choke Iran was now feeding a new economic corridor, one that bypassed traditional power centers entirely. And the most dangerous part? It was working without headlines, without noise, without resistance. The first cracks didn't appear on the battlefield. They appeared on trading screens. Oil prices surged, dipped, then surged again in unpredictable waves. Markets hate uncertainty, and this wasn't just uncertainty, it was controlled chaos. Investors realized something unsettling. The blockade wasn't stabilizing the region, it was destabilizing the entire global economy. Energy-dependent nations began scrambling. Europe hesitated. Asia recalculated. Every decision now carried risk. Every shipment became a gamble. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, forcing smaller players out of the market entirely. The flow of oil wasn't stopping, it was becoming selective, and selectivity is where power hides. Meanwhile, China remained calm. Its reserves were stable, its routes secured. While others reacted, it executed. And in that contrast, a new perception formed. Maybe the strongest power isn't the one that fights hardest, but the one that prepares best. As tensions escalated on water, another war erupted in silence: information. Headlines clashed, narratives collided. One side claimed control, the other claimed resilience. But truth became harder to find with every passing hour. Social media flooded with conflicting reports. One moment, the strait was secure. The next, it was on the brink of collapse. Analysts argued. Experts disagreed. But beneath the noise, one fact remained unchanged. The situation wasn't improving. It was evolving into something no one could fully control. And in that chaos, China said almost nothing. No bold statements, no dramatic warnings, just quiet movements and calculated actions. Silence, in this case, wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The turning point didn't come with an explosion. It came with a realization. The blockade wasn't forcing Iran to surrender. It was forcing the world to adapt. And once adaptation begins, control is already lost. Countries that once relied entirely on Western systems began exploring alternatives. New partnerships formed overnight. Old alliances started to weaken, not because of betrayal, but because survival demanded flexibility. And just like that, the balance of influence began to shift. Not dramatically, not visibly, but undeniably. Maps started to change, not publicly, but operationally. New routes emerged through unexpected regions, some longer, some riskier, but all outside traditional control. These weren't official corridors. They were shadow routes, built through coordination, necessity, and trust. And the more they were used, the stronger they became. The blockade had aimed to restrict movement. Instead, it had diversified it. And diversification is the enemy of control. Back in Washington, pressure began to mount. Officials faced a difficult truth. The strategy wasn't delivering the expected results. Publicly, confidence remained strong. Privately, doubts grew louder. Allies began asking questions. Quietly at first, then more directly. Was this strategy sustainable? Was it working? Or was it creating a problem bigger than the one it was meant to solve? But reversing course wasn't simple. Because backing down doesn't just change policy, it changes perception. The ripple effects spread far beyond the region, supply chains adjusted, trade routes recalibrated. Entire industries began preparing for a future where traditional dominance was no longer guaranteed. Emerging economies saw opportunity. If the system was changing, they could change with it. New deals were signed, new alliances formed, and slowly a new global structure began to take shape. It wasn't a revolution, it was a transition. And transitions are harder to stop than revolutions. China didn't rush, it didn't escalate, it didn't react emotionally. Instead, it waited, observed, calculated. Every move was deliberate, every response measured. This patience created an unexpected advantage. While others exhausted resources and attention, China conserved both. And in long conflicts, endurance often outweighs aggression. The world began to notice, not loudly, but clearly. Eventually, the realization became impossible to ignore. The blockade hadn't achieved its primary objective. The peace deal was no closer than before. If anything, it was further away. Iran remained defiant, China remained stable, and the United States faced a complex decision: continue, escalate, or adapt. None of the options were simple, because this wasn't just about a blockade anymore. It was about credibility, influence, and the future of global power. The world didn't end. The war didn't explode into total chaos, but something fundamental changed. Power was no longer defined the same way. Control of a region no longer guaranteed control of outcomes. Influence became more important than force. Strategy more powerful than strength. And in the end, the warning that started it all echoed louder than ever. The blockade won't stop the deal, it will destroy it. They didn't believe it then, but now they had no choice.